Hi, Happy New Year, and welcome to January's video tarot forecast, which is essentially the New Year video tarot forecast. The way that I'm planning to do this video is in two parts. So the first part is going to be the standard 3-card reading, which we'll be getting onto straight away after I've just explained the second part, which is going to be an 11-card reading for February through to December, where I'm going to draw 11 cards, one for each month, to provide a kind of focal point for the month, but one that isn't so much about telling the future or going into some kind of divinatory. Well, it does, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to draw 11 cards ahead. What I'm not going to do is do a theme for the month in terms of what is going to happen, because I just am not sure that those are entirely useful sometimes. It can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and also we end up being rather passive in the way that we experience things. Rather, what I would like to do is do what I do with the third card in the normal reading, and that tool card, that tool that gives you agency, that helps you to get to grips with what's going on in your life in a really practical, workable way. I'm going to be doing 11 tool cards, one for each month, and then from that, and you have something that you are able to use to engage with your life and with yourself and what's going on with it, far more than simply going, oh my goodness, well, this is going to be this card for this month, so I'm just going to sit back and wait for it to happen. Whatever it is that happens, what we hope is that one of those 11 cards for that month, that card, is going to be something that's really going to be very useful to deal with whatever it is that's going on. And the intention is that it will come to mind if and when you need it. And if you don't need it, then that's absolutely fine. So I'm going to go straight into the first part of the reading, which is our standard 3-card reading, and then on to the second part of the reading, which is going to be on a different video, just so that we can break things up a little bit. All right. So, welcome to January's reading. This reading is going to be, well, I mean, it's pretty much the way that the other readings often are. You can say that it's for the next 4 weeks or for January, but really it's, as you've probably found out if you've been watching the tarot forecast for any amount of time, everything's interlinked. So a reading from even 12 months ago will still feed into the reading today, and those readings will still echo, all of them, into the future. So I can say that this is for January and say that this is perhaps a dominating theme, but it's probably a theme with which you're familiar and with which you are familiar, and also a theme that you will continue to experience, possibly in different forms, going forward past January. So let's say that it is the theme of the month, but we also understand that there is a larger canvas being painted here, and this will be just one element, and all the elements are connected. So for those of you who are not familiar with the format, the 3-card reading works with the first card as a foundation. It's something that you are bringing in. You'll be bringing in many things. You'll be bringing in all of you to this, but it's one thing that's really playing a part in what's happening now, which is the card 2, which is the current weather. So you've got this foundational aspect that is in some way impacting or influencing, or has possibly kind of kicked off what is going on in the current weather. And I'm sorry, it's getting a bit dark here. The sun has just disappeared behind a cloud. So then the current weather is card 2. This is going to be the major theme for the month. And as always, it may be visible, it may be entirely obvious what's going on, it may be something you know, or it may be something that feels new, or that's something where you have to dig a little bit deeper under the surface of your life, possibly into the interiority of yourself to find it. And it may well be that once you've done that, you'll see that it's been activated for a very long time, but perhaps the reading just brings your attention to it for the first time in a way that is consciously meaningful. And the third card is that tool card, which is that agency card. It's the card where you are able to interact meaningfully with events that are going on inside, outside, and around you in a way that allows you simply not to be a spectator to what's going on, or somebody who feels like they can throw up their hands and say, well, I can't do anything to affect this. It starts to show you the way that you do have agency in the reading, that you are able to have an impact on your reading, that you are, on your circumstances, and actually that you have a lot more power than you might think. And I think that that's key here, and I'm not entirely sure why. That there may well be a moment where you are given some sense of having an empowerment or a level of empowerment that before you hadn't really noticed that you had. So this may be a way of opening your eyes to a particular dynamic that is familiar, and yet how you meet that dynamic may be something new. So I have shuffled the cards, I've cut the deck, I've got the 3 cards lying in front of me here, and I am going to go straight into the foundational card. I haven't turned them over, so I am as new to this reading as you will be. Okay, so the foundational card is the 9, let me see if I can get this without the light reflecting. The 9 of Swords, which is cruelty. This deck, if you are not familiar with it, you haven't seen it before, you haven't heard who I've spoken about, that there's the artist behind it, is by Carl Rohrig. It is the Rohrig Tarot. And I've always found this particular version of the 9 of Swords a really clear one. So the light isn't great here. I'm going to go in a little bit closer so that you can see. I will actually, excuse me, I will actually put a link to the cards so that you've got them clearly in front of you. But if you can't see here, there is the detail of the eye, obviously, and tears, and blood across the cheek, and barbed wire that's running, you see there, along the bottom. And then there's the 9 swords that have been sketched over the cheek. And the 9 of Swords is an interesting one because it's painful, but the pain is often self-inflicted. And by self-inflicted, it may be that you have experienced, this is in the past, this is what you're bringing in. So this may be something that's happened recently. It may be to do with the Christmas season. It may be something that you're really no stranger to, except perhaps it is more front of mind than it has been before. And very often the festive season is a time for reflection, and those reflections aren't always they aren't always happy reflections. I know that I have an entirely ambivalent relationship to Christmas, for example, and I notice that it has an impact on my emotions, my feelings around this time of year that seem to come out of nowhere, and I seem to have no conscious control. And I always have to remind myself that this is a time of year that I don't feel particularly great, and I always forget. And then when it happens again, it's like, oh yes, there you go. So don't feel that you're alone in perhaps feeling alone. There are many people for whom Christmas is either tinged with sadness, or wholly ambivalent, a thing that they'd like to avoid, and also for many people a thing they'd like to embrace. So I just linking in the idea of the 9 of Swords with the season, as we're looking back, as we're looking forward, and with what eye are we looking forward? Are we looking forward with an eye that has been, that has seen something that it hasn't wanted to see, that has experienced the kind of pain? So when I talk about self-inflicted pain, I'm not saying that you are responsible for what happened that caused the pain. Sometimes you are, and sometimes we're not responsible. Sometimes we just are in the circumstances where we experience it, and we have no ability to escape it. But what you are responsible for is the level of care and attention that you give to your feelings, so that you are able in some way to live peaceably alongside them, to accept them, to work through them if you can. So they are not necessarily your fault, but they are your responsibility. That's the blessing and the bugger about it, is that they are entirely yours, how you feel. And because we're working here with swords and not cups, we're also working with that idea that it is an idea about something. It is not purely feeling based. In fact, it is, swords are to do with the mind, they're to do with mental processes, they're to do with psychological processes. So this kind of pain is psychological pain. This is the pain based on a thought, a memory, an idea, a viewpoint. But it doesn't mean that the pain is any less, and it doesn't mean that the pain is any less real. It just means that the pain is derived from a psychological state. And very often it's a psychological state that is based on memory. So that is very much a foundational card where that experience of something is then re-experienced. But it's not simply re-experienced from a memory point of view, because memories also conjure up and they also trigger pain. So this brings back and it opens wounds. As you can see there's the barbed wire that is opening wounds, and there's blood down the side of the face. I'm just going to see if there's a word on here that... Now what's interesting is this is the word that comes out here on this, because Roerich always writes things. There's cruelty, which is obviously the title, but obviously there's also one that says cruelty to yourself or to oneself, self-punishment, and a very strong word here, fanaticism. So let's situate this idea of fanaticism. Where is it that our thoughts are so fixated that they become fanatical? It's almost as if it's what Jung would have termed a complex. So the idea of thoughts being constellated as they almost have their own personality in their own life, and they come with a particular energy signature, a particular emotional signature. And they can intrude on our everyday life to the point where they are impossible either to ignore, but also very difficult to know how to deal with them. So it becomes fanatical in as much as it becomes this part of ourselves that almost holds us hostage. And that's really what the barbed wire is about. Barbed wire is supposed to keep things out, but it also keeps things in. It doesn't allow for a flow of information, of feelings. And so the idea here is that where is it that we become fanatical, or our thoughts rather become fanatical? If you think of the Nine of Swords, it is the damage that we do when we grieve in a way, or that we feel pain in a way that is turned in on ourselves. It's not pain that is allowed to run free. It's not allowed to be processed. It's not allowed to move through. It's held in. And when it's held in, then it becomes much more of a solid presence. It becomes something that is much more difficult to deal with, because what it does is it starts creating patterns and imprints of behaviors, so that immediately when something happens that is familiar, we are triggered right back into it. We have an association, a mental association that takes us into that. Sorry, I thought I'd just turn on a light. It was getting ridiculous. And I really apologise for the level of the poor light quality up until then. And it's not exactly good now, but, you know, this is December. Oh, it isn't. It's January. This is January, and goodness me, my mind is still in last year. A little bit of the Nine of Swords there. And it's January. It's still dark. Of course, it's England, so it's bloody miserable out there, so please excuse me for the really poor video quality there. So back to the card. This foundation is a pattern that is probably familiar. It may have reared its head again with some kind of familiarity. It may have changed guise and come in a different form. It may be a new kind of grief, but one where you are struggling to find a way out of it. And I guess the point here is to be careful when grieving becomes something that is weaponized against you. So that instead of feeling the pain of something in a way that can, I think that very often people struggle to feel pain because there is an intrinsic, unspoken and often unconscious fear that if we totally give in to the pain that we're feeling, we will disappear or we'll be consumed by it and we'll never come back. And that is the mediating ego that doesn't like to lose control. Whereas if we were simply to allow that pain to move through us in a way that we didn't censor it, then we wouldn't end up censoring ourselves, and in the process our souls and our thoughts, and then creating even more pain, because it becomes this repetitive pattern where we not only, feel the original pain, but then we feel our own judgments about that pain as well, and then our own judgments of ourselves about how we judge that pain. So you can see it's a mirror upon mirror upon mirror. So I'm going into a lot of detail about the Nine of Swords because I think that it needs to be made really clear that it is a particular kind of cruelty. So it is self-inflicted. This is not, you may well take it out on others around you, but it is self-inflicted. And it's a particular kind of cruelty because it's swords, it's not cups, it's not emotional. So there is that pattern that's behind it. So that's the foundation. That's nothing new. That is what has happened. So I'm not suggesting that that is something that is going to happen. It very much is the palette from which you are painting a particular area of your life right now. So that's the good news. It's foundational, so it's something that you can deal with. It's you are not a stranger to it. Okay, so that's foundational, and then the current weather, a wonderful antidote to the Nine of Swords is your Ace of Swords here. So it's cutting things right back to basics, getting to that one clear truth. So whereas the 9 is the penultimate card in the sword suit in terms of the numbered cards, where 10 is, it's the kind of collapsing under the weight of the 9. In many respects, the 10 is better than the 9 because it's just done. You're just done. In the 9, you're still going through it. The Ace is the purest form of the sword suit. So for those of you unfamiliar with tarot, the aces are not the same as the other numbered cards. All 4 aces talk about a blueprint. So the Ace of Swords is the blueprint of swords. It is its pure archetypal form. It does not exist here. So in other words, it's divine. It's divine in nature. It is what we can strive for. We'll never manage to achieve it because as soon as you bring it down into duality, it turns into the 2 of Swords. So the Ace of Swords remains the Ace only in concept. But what we can do is strive, and in those moments we can work with the Ace in a way that is entirely meaningful and in a way that is very effective. So it's something that we never fully embody, but it will flash out in moments, as you can see there with the flash on the card. It will flash out, and there will be this flash of insight, this flash of understanding, this flash of knowledge. It will be a clearing away and getting back down to that initial insight that holds the kernel of truth in it that has become so overlain with complexity and pain in the 9 that you just have this moment of seeing and knowing either what it is that's been going on, either the genesis of what it is that's happened, or what it is that you can do about it, or both. There's something here about being able to see clearly. Now, the thing about being able to see clearly is, well, there's 2 things that come to mind immediately. The first one is that it can happen in a moment and then disappear. Okay, so you can see clearly and then it goes. And that's just the way the mind works. Sometimes that moment of truth is too much. It's too much truth, and so therefore, it just goes back into hiding. But it's happened. It's happened. There is a part of us that remembers it, even though we can't remember it. I mean, there have been times where I've had moments of insight that just seem completely mind-blowing. The Ace of Swords, mind-blowing, and then just forget them. About 5 minutes later, it's like, what was so important about that thought? What was that thought? That's not accidental. That's repression. That is the mind then putting it back because it's sometimes too much to handle. But the very fact that it came out is the important thing. It is there. Something has changed. There is no doubt about that. There is something in the internal landscape that has changed. So if you have this insight, don't panic if you forget about it. You haven't forgotten about it. It's just that the part of you that remembers is not the part that you have immediate access to. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which I think is really important about insight, because otherwise, if we don't learn this about insight, we go straight back to the 9, okay? And that is that insight does not mean cure, okay? Insight does not mean that suddenly everything's going to be different and that you're never going to do this again, you're never going to feel that again, and things are going to fall into place, and as a result, that particular aspect of your life is going to fall into place. I think that that's one of the most misguided, misleading, and possibly demoralizing aspects if you start to go into this kind of inner work of the psyche, or even starting to try and understand how the mind works, is that very often what will happen is that we will have an insight and say we don't forget it, but we have this insight, and then we think things are just going to change dramatically from top to bottom all at once, and we'll never have to go through it again. That's not true. From a psychological perspective, there is the idea of working through. So the insight is just the start. So what happens is that once we've had that insight, we then get many opportunities, oh joy, to work that through. So we've got the understanding, but then we have to get the emotional and embodied experience of working it through. It's got to work its way all out across all levels, through the mind, through the body, through the emotions, through our energy. So all 4 suits, which represent all those aspects, are then affected. So if you have this amazing insight, that's the beginning. So is the Ace. It's the beginning. It's the start of everything. And then comes this period of working through. So don't beat yourself up if you have the insight, but actually either not much happens immediately, or you have no idea what to do with it, or what the hell happens next, or that the same thing happens and you seem to do the same thing. Because that's not true. You may do the same thing, but you'll catch yourself. It will not last as long as the time before. Working through is painstaking, repetitive, often frustrating and boring, but can also be incredibly liberating, enlivening. And I think the difference there is the level of awareness, the mind that you bring to it. If you bring a perfectionistic attitude that everything must be right, you're going to end up back here because everything just isn't going to feel right. If you remember that this is the beginning of the journey, then that is the start, and it can be incredible. It also doesn't have to be the kind of cloud parting like you see here, sword of God, angels singing, roads opening up moment that a lot of people say insight is. It can just be a sort of dawning realization or an understanding of something really quite small and seemingly minor, but actually very significant, because my sense is that it will unlock a lot of other similar experiences that have been happening, that it's the key to many different things. It's just that it may look like a sort of rusty, old, worn key rather than something shiny and bright and polished and, just presenting itself from a cloud. So don't underestimate the power of an old rusty key, because that can be your moment of insight. So that is the theme for this month. There is an understanding or a knowing. Remember, with the Ace, it's the beginning. You use it, you need to work with it. And sometimes part of the working is out of your hands, and sometimes it includes forgetting. So don't worry about that. But there will be this moment this month. And I would suggest that in terms of the year, given that the significance of this time of the year, and as we are looking forward, that this will in some way have an impact throughout the year and beyond, but in a way that is really quite immediately observable. But it may be that you actually start to see the results further on down the line. So there is your Ace of Swords, the perfect way of getting back to the basics and clearing away all of that barbed wire to get to that one truth. Okay, and the tool that you use to do this. So when something's coming up and you feel perhaps powerless or you don't know what to do, so if there's that flash of insight and there's the truth of a matter, even if it's something relatively minor, this is the tool, and I trust that it will appear to you, it will present itself to you in a way that is really entirely meaningful for you. The 10 of discs. Okay, so we have gone from 2 mental cards, you know, 2 psychological cards, to the most solid suit that there is, and then the most solid card in the suit. And my overall feeling about this card, given it's the tool, is that it's time to cash something in. I will frequently say this when the 10 of discs comes up. It's time to cash something in. And by cashing something in, it may well be something quite, literal, that you cash in some savings. Discs are to do with money, after all, and resources. It's time to use what you have. But there is also the metaphorical sense of cashing something in, and that is to stop, to put an end to it, to hand it over. So when you cash something in, it's like you just go, okay, I'm done. You know, you just throw your cards on the table and you get up and you walk off. And the reason I say that is because it is the final card in the tarot deck. It is the court cards in the discs don't count. They are seen separately. So the 10 of discs is really an urging towards change. Change is inevitable. I will often quote L'On-Milo Duquette, who has a brilliant saying for the 10 of discs, which is that it is the card form of cosmic constipation. Now, I know that he talks about the Thoth deck, but Roerich very much based his deck on Crowley's and Harris's Thoth. And that idea of cosmic constipation, well, it's self-explanatory then. Something has got to move. Something's got to move. It's blocking things up. It's making things stolid. Things are heavy. It's got to the point where if it doesn't move, it's unhealthy. And also there is an idea then of elimination. So something's got to move, and it's also just got to be let go of. That's enough now. You know, you've saved up as much as you need to, or as much as you can. You've gone through with this situation in this way as far as you can go. This particular set of circumstances will give you no more than it already has. Time to cash in, time to go. And I think that in terms of the tool card, when you put this with the ace, a beginning and an ending, is that it is the understanding that something has to shift. So you've got the understanding that something must go. You've got the insight that change is inevitable. And you also have the mental capacity and ability to think things through so that you can work this out in a way that works for you. But really, I mean, when this card comes along in terms of a situation with somebody where they have just been trying and putting a lot of capital into something, whether that is financial capital, energetic capital, emotional capital, a lot of thinking, this is the time where you either go, right, well, I can now reap the benefits of this. I can reap the rewards because this is it. This is the point where I need to just now say, I want something back for myself from this. Whether that's submitting an essay, a dissertation, or whether it is, as I said, putting that deposit that you've been saving up down on a mortgage or something like that. Or whether you go, you know what, I've invested emotionally in this enough, and it's time for me to give back or to myself. And the way that I do that, the way that I cash in is by just not doing that anymore. So in other words, you're giving yourself something here because you've been giving and giving and giving. And this time, what you're going to do is you're going to take all that back, take it for yourself and take off. So it's really, so it can come in many forms, but one thing is that when you apply this tool card, it will be in a very practical way. It's not just simply going to be a decision that you make, it will be acted out because it is in discs, so it is in this world. So you need to be able to work in a way that is meaningful for you, that that isn't just simply about that idea of that insight. There you go, and then poof, it goes. But it suggests that this month the insight is going to be strong enough for you to have a realization that there is something here that's sitting there, that's been amassing, that is time to just put a stop to it, or to write out that check, or to sign on the dotted line, or to tear the contract up. But end of the line it is in terms of one particular thing, and you will know because and it will work very nicely because you will have your mind on your side. It will be a particularly dispassionate process. I think that you will be able to be dispassionate about it. You'll be able to analyze and think and work things out in a way that is beneficial to you. It's not there may be a huge amount of emotion attached to it because you've got the Nine of Swords coming in. However, there will be a part of your psyche or a part of your mind that will be able to step forward and just be able to draw a few lines, and also to be able to work out how things are sorted out. So you do have that. But what you've got to do here is trust in yourself. You've got to trust that you can do this. In other words, believe that the ace is there. By trusting that you have the capacity and you have the resources and the internal resources and the mental resources to be able to do this, is really that moment where you reach for the ace. Is saying that I can and will do this. And you know what? The reason I can and will do this is because it is down to me. Nobody else is A, going to be able to do it, B, knows how to do it, or C, wants to do it. It is down to me. And that is the liberation from the Nine of Swords, is the understanding that you may not have caused this, or you may have. It may not be that you are responsible for what's going on, but you are responsible for yourself and how you deal with it. And you have your mind as your ally, and you will have a moment where you will know what it is that needs to be done. And that may be entirely brilliant news from a financial perspective. It may be painful from a relationship perspective. It may be entirely brilliant news from a relationship perspective. It may be that it shifts to another level. But it shifts, and that's the thing, shift it must. This is about something shifting, otherwise it's just gonna feel shit. There's no other way to say it. So there are your 3 cards for January and beyond. And I will be coming along with the second part of the reading immediately to give you your 11 cards that will give you agency in the rest of the months of the year. Okay, I hope you have, I hope you've had a brilliant new year, if you've celebrated it, or however you've celebrated it, and I wish you all the very best for January. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, you can either comment below on YouTube, or you can send me an email, or you can message me via my website. Otherwise, take very good care of yourself, and I will see you next month.